Hey, welcome to Mariners Church. I'm so glad you are with us today. If you're watching with a group of people from Mariners hosted here, I love that you're doing that. And I know that many of you are watching online right now, joining us from different places, and just honored that you are with us today. If we haven't met, my name is Eric. I'm the senior pastor here. Before I jump into the scripture, I want to celebrate something with you. This is really exciting. Next weekend, we are launching Mariners at Union Rescue Mission. Union Rescue Mission is an incredible rescue mission that is located in Skid Row, or on Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. And we're so honored. We've been having services with them for the last month, but next Sunday, we're actually opening not only for the residents of Union Rescue Mission, but for anyone who lives in that area, for those who are on Skid Row, to come to worship service, to come have church. And so it's awesome. I'm so thankful that we get to do this together. And you're a part. You are a part of Mariners being on Skid Row because of your giving. It is your generosity that makes things like this possible. In fact, in the next several weeks, we're going to launch so many new worship services. I just want to be sure you know what you're a part of. We're taking our Thursday night gatherings, Thursday nights at Mariners, which is for young adults. We've been having those at the Irvine congregation, and we're expanding to 4 different cities. So we're going to be in Irvine, Anaheim, Santa Ana, and Huntington Beach with Thursday nights at Mariners. Your giving finances that. Finances going after the generation of young adults that we love so much. We also are launching 2 new Mariners congregations in January, Mariners San Clemente and Mariners Yorba Linda. Some of you live in those cities. I hope you'll join us, but it's really your giving that finances that. And then we're launching Mariners at Union Rescue Mission next weekend. So this is really a special season at our church. And really, many of those plans came about after our annual budget was finalized. So I just want to be honest with you about what December needs to be for our church in terms of giving. December is always a really important month. Actually, about 25% of all of the giving we receive happens in the month of December. So December really is so important for financing the ministry of our church. But all the things that I mentioned, those are opportunities, at least the Thursday night opportunity and Union Rescue Mission, those came about after we finalized our budget. So if there's any year that December is even more important, it's this year. So if Mariners is your church, whether you join us every week online, or maybe you join sometimes in person and you watch online some, I hope that you will participate in year-end giving. It's going to be good for you. Because where you put your treasure, your heart goes. And your heart needs to be in these things. Caring for the poor in downtown LA, caring about young adults, encountering Jesus, launching new congregations. These are the things that you want your heart to be passionate about. So you give and your heart goes there. And obviously it's also good for your church because your giving finances everything we do. So for you to be a part of giving during this season of year-end giving, text online to the number on the screen, and I invite you to be generous to your church in this season. All right, we're going to wrap up our teaching in the book of Nehemiah, and I'm then going to take us to Christmas because the end of Nehemiah gets us to Christmas, and we have begun our Christmas season here at Mariners. What do you think about when you see the guys on the side of the road with a sign? I mean, sometimes you'll be at a red light and you'll see the person who's, advertising the new pizza joint or just letting you know there's a deal there. And you can tell that the person who's flipping the sign's not that engaged. I mean, they're leaning against a tree or a wall and they're on their phone and they're kind of, every now and then doing this. Those people don't inspire me, but who inspires me? Haven't you seen the guys who are so into it? I mean, they're like doing, I can't even pull it off. They're amazing with how they do it. It's like they've practiced at home. They got all these flips and they're really excellent with the sign and they're just passionate as they do it. Multiple times I've been at a red light and I've seen the person flipping the sign and I have envied that person. I have thought, I want that job. As I've seen the person passionately using the sign, making eye contact with you and say, come on, you come here, and really into it. I've wanted to be that person. In fact, I've shared that with Kay, my wife, multiple times as we're sitting there at a red light and we see the sign guy. I've said, I want to be that person. And she's like, why? And usually when I say it, it's because being a leader in that moment has been overwhelming. And in my mind, if I would have that job, I would go to work, but work would not go home with me. And sometimes as a leader, oftentimes as a leader, work goes home with me. And when I see the sign guy, I've told Kay, I want that job. I would give my best, just like that guy. I would give my best, all for the glory of God. But then I would leave work at work and I would go home. Kay looks at me and she says, baby, I love you so much, but that's not what you would do. You'd bring the sign home and you would practice. You would come up with new moves. And I love that about you. But I don't always love that about me. If you're a leader, you know what it feels like to live with restlessness. Perhaps you've seen the guy with the sign and you've envied him in that moment and wanted to have a job where you didn't take the burden with you wherever you go. The book of Nehemiah has been an incredible study, and we've learned lots of leadership principles from Nehemiah. But Nehemiah 13, the last chapter in the book, is the chapter that inspires me the most. It actually is challenging for me on how to live with my restlessness. Chapter 13 is often not studied because when you read chapter 13, you can really see Nehemiah failing. There's a whole lot of leadership books written about Nehemiah, but many of them skip chapter 13 because when you read chapter 13, from a human standpoint, it looks like Nehemiah fails. It looks like everything he wanted to see happen doesn't happen. It's really not going to be an encouraging chapter to read, but it's really encouraging for me because I now know that Nehemiah gets me. He knows what it's like to live with restlessness, and he knows what it's like to lead even when you feel like you're failing in the midst of your leadership. I love the book of Nehemiah because it's so raw and honest, and this includes chapter 13. More than Nehemiah inspires me with how he casts a compelling vision, and he did inspire us in chapter 2. More than he inspires me on how he's able to coordinate lots of people along the wall, and he did in chapter 3. He inspires me in Nehemiah 13 on how to keep going when it feels like you failed, on what to do with your restlessness as a leader, because you're going to live with restlessness. So here's the setup to Nehemiah chapter 13. Nehemiah has gone back to Persia. Remember, he had asked the king Artaxerxes of Persia to send him to Jerusalem so he could rebuild the wall. Nehemiah has rebuilt the wall. He rebuilt it with a team of people in just 52 days, an amazing accomplishment. But he then wanted to not only rebuild a wall, but rebuild the people. He cared about the people. He didn't want a completed wall and a crumbling people. And so he led the people to repent. They made commitments before God. He repopulated the city of Jerusalem. I mean, amazing things happened under Nehemiah's leadership. But he had promised Artaxerxes in Persia that he would go back. And so he goes back to Persia. And I imagine, and you've perhaps had this season as a leader, that he goes back to Persia and he sleeps really well. Not because he's in the posh palace again, but because he's done well. He's completed the task. The mission of rebuilding the wall and repopulating the city is accomplished. And you know that feeling as a leader when the goal is accomplished or the initiative is complete? I mean, you rest. For a moment, you rest. You thank God for the team that he put you on. You're thankful for the people that helped accomplish the mission. You have the satisfaction of a job well done. But if you're a leader, usually the rest doesn't last that long. You have just a brief season of fulfillment, like, yes, it was accomplished, but you still have this hunger to want to do more. You wish you didn't have that hunger at times. You wish you could be like the sign guy and just go home, but you can't because you have this restlessness at times inside of you to want to do more, which is what Nehemiah does. So he goes back. Nehemiah has gone to Persia, but Nehemiah 13, he's going to go back to Jerusalem. And when he gets there, it's going to read like a complete failure. He expected when he went to Jerusalem the first time to see people in disgrace. When he goes back to Jerusalem the second time, he does not expect to find the people in disgrace. And remember, they had committed to honor the temple, to honor the Sabbath, and to not intermarry with other people groups, which was not a racial commitment, but a religious commitment so that the land wouldn't be populated with little g gods from those other people groups. They had committed all of these things, 3 major commitments. And then Nehemiah gets back and look what he finds. Here we are, Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 6 and 7. It was only later that I asked the king for a leave of absence so I could return to Jerusalem. So now he goes back to Jerusalem the second time. And then I discovered the evil that Eliashib had done on behalf of Tobiah by providing him a room in the courts of God's house, which was a violation of how the temple was to be treated. Basically, Tobiah is sleeping in the temple. And then verse 15, at that time, I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath. So they're working on the Sabbath. No, they're dishonoring the Sabbath. They were also bringing in stores of grain and loading them on donkeys along with wine, grapes, and figs. All kinds of goods were being brought to Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. So they broke their second commitment. Then verse 23, in those days I saw Jews who had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. So they broke their third commitment to not give their daughters in marriage to the neighboring people groups. Oh my goodness, Nehemiah 13, the book of Nehemiah ends with God's people not keeping a single one of their commitments. A single commitment. They couldn't keep any. They broke every single one of their promises. In these passages that we just read, you saw at the same time. And so the sense is, as you read the text, that Nehemiah finds out this news in rapid succession. He returns from Persia to Jerusalem. He sees that the temple's being dishonored. And then at the same time, he learns that the Sabbath is being dishonored. And then at the same time, he learns that people are giving themselves in intermarriages. And so the land's going to be populated with foreign little g gods again. He finds out about all of this news in rapid succession. If you're a leader, you have been there. You've had one of those days where your day begins with this dreaded email, and then there's a meeting mid-morning that just crushes you. And then everything that happens after lunch is even worse than the things that happened in the morning. You hear news after news after news in rapid succession that just is distressing and leaves you distraught. This is Nehemiah. So what does he do? What does he do? This is why Nehemiah 13 is so instructive to me. You're going to see the fruit of resolve in Nehemiah. When he arrived in Jerusalem the first time in Nehemiah chapter 2, he expected difficulties. In Nehemiah 13, he did not expect the difficulties. They were unexpected challenges. And the only way that you keep going as a leader when you are overwhelmed with the unexpected challenges is if you have pre-decided what you're going to do when those unexpected challenges come. It's one thing to persevere through the trial and the struggle of expected challenges. It's quite another to keep going in the midst of the unexpected. That takes resolve. Resolve is about pre-deciding, here is how I'm going to live, even when unexpected challenges come my way. Here is how I'm going to persevere. Here is how I'm going to lead, even when I don't expect these things to come my way. In fact, you'll see Nehemiah responds with restlessness, and he attacks every single one of the problems. In fact, notice in the scripture, you'll see that here's how he handles with decisive action all of the struggles and problems that come his way. So after learning that the temple was being neglected, notice what he does. I threw out all of Tobiah's household possessions. I ordered all the rooms to be purified. I had the articles of the house of God restored. I also found out that the portions for the Levites had not been given. I rebuked the officials. I was asking them why the house of God has been neglected. I gathered the Levites. I stationed them at their posts. I appointed people as treasurers over the storehouses. He was very decisive when he found out that the temple was being neglected. But he also was decisive when he found out the Sabbath was not being honored. I warned them against selling food on that day. I rebuked the nobles. I said to them, didn't your ancestors do the same? I gave orders. I posted. I warned. I instructed the Levites to purify themselves. So another challenge. He knew exactly how he was going to respond, and he responded with decisive action. And then when he saw people were intermarrying, he responded as well. I rebuked them. I cursed them. Now, clearly, in Jerusalem at this time, there wasn't an HR department that Nehemiah is worried about being accountable to, because he's really an intense leader. I rebuked them, I cursed them, I forced them to take an oath, I drove him away from me. So Nehemiah is being very decisive. How? How was he able, when his day was completely overwhelmed with this horrific news that felt as if all he had done as a leader was completely wasted? Have you ever felt that way as a leader? Have you ever felt like you have poured out so much and now it seems so fruitless? This is how this is his day. This is Nehemiah 13. This is not a fairy tale ending, but yet in the midst of those challenges and difficulties, he was resolved to keep going. How? How was he able to be so decisive? We saw that he was decisive in his restlessness, but really the secret is his restlessness was combined with this resting in his God. In fact, notice you'll see this rhythm in Nehemiah 13. After he found out that the temple was being neglected, he prays to his God. Verse 14, remember me for this, my God, and don't erase the deeds of faithful love I have done for the house of my God and for its services. So he was restless with decisive action, and then he rested. God, remember me. Remember what I've done for your temple. Restless and resting at the same time. When he was restless about the Sabbath being dishonored, notice that he also rests in God. He prays again, Nehemiah 13, verse 22, remember me for this also, my God, and look on me with compassion according to the abundance of your faithful love. So he's restless, he has decisive action, but it's mixed with, God, I'm asking you to remember me. I can't fix all of these problems. I'm unable to change the hearts of these people. So will you please work, God? Will you please remember me? You see the same kind of posture when he finds out that people are intermarrying with other religions. Notice in Nehemiah chapter 13, after learning of the intermarriages with other religions, he prays again, remember them, my God, for defiling the priesthood as well as the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. So there's this sacred rhythm in Nehemiah 13 of Nehemiah displaying his restlessness and then resting in his God. In fact, this is how the whole book of Nehemiah ends. This is the end of Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 30 and 31. You see his restlessness, and then you see his resting. His restlessness. So I purified them from everything foreign, and I assigned specific duties to each of the priests and Levites. I also arranged for the donation of the wood at the appointed times and for the first fruits. So his restlessness combined with resting, remember me, my God, with favor. This is the secret to Nehemiah's resolve. And this is what's so motivating for me as a leader. I actually am motivated by Nehemiah's very bad day because I see his resolve and he continues to go. I'm motivated by what many would call a leadership failure as I see how Nehemiah responds in the midst of failure. This is how you know the real character of a leader, not how the leader responds when everything's going awesome, but how the leader responds when things aren't going well. And this is why Nehemiah 13 is so encouraging for me, because we see Nehemiah's resolve. The fruit of it, it happens because of the roots beneath the surface. Resolve is living with restlessness and resting. It's both. As a leader, you're going to have restlessness, but are you going to also rest in your God? So we all want the fruit of resolve. The fruit is on the surface. It's what everybody sees. We want to be a leader like Nehemiah, who when things go very wrong, we continue to go forward in the mission that God has given us. We want the resolve of Nehemiah. But if you want the resolve of Nehemiah, you've got to mix together your restlessness with your resting. So I want to talk to you about both, about your restlessness as a leader and your resting. Now, I keep saying that you're a leader because I want to remind you, we've been walking through the book of Nehemiah for 7 weeks now. If you are a Christian, we have been challenging you to view yourself as a leader because Jesus saved you from your sin and your shame but he also sent you into this world. And he's given you your role that you have right now in life, whether you're a student, whether you lead in your neighborhood or in your community. Maybe you have a company that you founded, or maybe you work in a company, but you have people around you that you influence. So you're a leader. And so if you want to be an effective leader with resolve, you need both restlessness and resting. So restlessness. If you're a leader, you're going to live with restlessness. It's part of what makes leaders who they are. Restlessness is going to exist in you as a leader because drift always occurs. Drift occurs. We see this in Nehemiah 13. The people had committed these three major commitments before God. Nehemiah leaves, goes back to Persia. The people break every single one of their commitments. And this is just honest, real life. In every organization and among groups of people, drift or misalignment is going to happen over time, which is why God uses restless leaders to address the misalignment or the drift. Drift is going to take place. So the reason that you have some restlessness within you is because there's going to be drift that needs to be addressed. And what do leaders do when there is drift? What do they do with their restlessness? Well, we see that Nehemiah, he inspected. When he arrived back from Persia, he walks around Jerusalem once again. He notices that the temple's being dishonored, that people are dishonoring the Sabbath. He inspects. There's a leadership adage, you've heard it said before, and it's very true, that as a leader, you must inspect whatever it is that you expect. So if you have high expectations for the team of people that you're leading, if you expect this value to bear fruit in the people that you're responsible for, you can't just articulate the value. You then have to expect and see if the value is actually being lived out. If you have shared with a group of people that you're responsible for, that you were leading, here's how we're going to live around here. Here's the behavior that we're going to display. If it really matters to you, if you really expect that behavior to be lived out, then you have to dip down and inspect. And your restlessness is going to cause you to do so. So don't ignore your restlessness. God's going to use your restlessness to cause you to inspect. And this is what Nehemiah did. His restlessness caused him to inspect. His restlessness also caused him to re-articulate what was important. Notice we saw in Nehemiah 13 that Nehemiah didn't merely confront the people. He reminded them, here's why this is important. When they had started to intermarry with other cultures again, Nehemiah said, let me remind you about Solomon, our ancestor. This is what led to his downfall. No, let's not be this kind of people. He re-articulated what was most important. Leadership is often like coaching little kids soccer, which I've done, which was a blast when I coached my daughter's soccer team when she was 5 years old. It was so fun. But as a soccer coach of the Soccer Rockers, we went 7-1 that year. It was an amazing experience. I had to repeat over and over again the most important things. We try to score on that goal. That's the way that we're going. And so as a leader, you often are re-articulating what is most vital and most important. Your restlessness is going to cause you to do so. Restlessness also causes leaders to confront problems and sometimes problem people. Problems rarely correct themselves. And the longer you lead, the more you know this is true. That if you hope that that problem self-corrects, likely when you come back to that problem 6 months from now, it's going to be worse and more painful to deal with than if you deal with it now. Problems rarely self-correct or auto-correct. They require leaders to step in. When a car gets misaligned, my car does at times, it's not going to automatically get realigned. It needs an intervention. It needs to be brought to the shop to get the alignment on the tires fixed. When my garage gets really dirty, it's not going to fix itself once a year. I have to intervene and clean out the garage. And when misalignment happens in an organization or problems reveal themselves in people that you're leading, they don't correct themselves. Leaders must step in. I'm not the only leader to admit this, and it's painfully true. So many times I have waited to confront a problem, and when I have finally dealt with it, I have recognized that if I had dealt with this earlier, it would have gone so much more smoothly than it goes when I wait. And you've probably seen this as well. Never have I moved too fast. I've always moved too slow. Nehemiah, his resolve causes him to address the problems that he sees among God's people. His restlessness, he embraces his restlessness for God's glory. So his restlessness is actually really good. Some of you have this restlessness as a leader and you wish it would go away. It's a burden, but God will often use the restlessness that you have. But not all restlessness is holy. Not all restlessness is good. Not all of it is sacred. It's only sacred if it's combined with rest. See, your restlessness can be sacred if you mix it with rest. Then it turns into resolve. Let me show you how this looks like if you chart it out. We obviously want this. We want resolve. And resolve is high levels of restlessness, but mixed with high levels of rest. And I'm going to talk to you in a moment about rest because we saw Nehemiah both restless and resting. But if you have high restlessness with low rest, that's anxious leadership. And some of you, that's really how you lead. You are an anxious leader, always worried, always overwhelmed, and you send signals to the people that you're leading that you're an anxious leader because it's never enough. You're always restless. And because you don't combine your restlessness with holy rest before God, you're anxious. Then there's complacency. Complacency is when someone is fully resting but never restless. And then no pulse is someone who's not really alive. I mean, there's really no such thing as having low rest and low restlessness. Many leaders live in anxiousness, and many who just have wishful thinking live in complacency. The healthy place to live, though, is resolve. It's where you have high restlessness. You're not trying to mute your restlessness as a leader, but you are going to combine it with rest. And this is what Nehemiah does exceptionally well. He ends the journey resting. In fact, look at verse 29 and 31. This is how Nehemiah chapter 13 and the entire book of Nehemiah ends. Remember them, my God. Remember them. And then remember me, my God, with favor. He trusts that God is going to be the one who ultimately handles all of the problem people in his life. Now, Nehemiah, with his restlessness, confronted people, but then he rests. God, I've done all I can. They now belong to you. You are the one who justifies me, and you are the one who avenges. You're the one who I trust this problem to. I am going to rest in you. Remember them, my God, and remember me with favor. I lived my restlessness, but I'm ultimately the whole time I am resting in you. Nehemiah was able to rest, not because every problem was solved, but because he trusted the one who governs wisely all things. He trusted his God. As a leader, you can rest not because all the problems are solved. The problems are never going to be solved. There's always going to be another problem. But you can rest because your ultimate hope is in the one who governs and watches over all things. Nehemiah was able to rest because he placed his hope not in the perfect people. The people were not perfect and were never going to be perfect. But he was able to rest because he placed his hope in his perfect God. There is a really bad Christian cliche that perhaps you've heard. Do your best and trust God with the rest. It's a really bad cliche. Why would you live that way? Why would you do all your work and then just trust God with the leftovers? Do your best and then just trust God with the rest. Really bad. Much better is you rest and you trust God with all of it. That even in your restlessness, you are resting in him because he's the one who has given you your secure identity as his son or his daughter. Even in your restlessness, you are resting because you know he's always working on your behalf. You don't do your best and then trust God with the rest. You trust God with all of it, which is why Nehemiah has such resolve, because his restlessness is combined with his resting. And you can rest not in your work, but in the finished work of Jesus. See, you're going to be restless without rest if you're only trusting your work. But if you work while you're trusting the finished work of Jesus, that Jesus entered this world and placed himself on the cross to take away all your sin and your shame. And because you've believed in him, you are fully accepted by him. If you rest in that, even when you're working, you're really at rest. You're restless in your leadership, but you're ultimately resting in your Savior who has given you your secure identity. But Eric, it's so hard to rest. It is. This is a recurring struggle in my life to constantly rest in him. I fall short in this area of finding my worth in something else other than him, of finding my worth in how I'm doing as a leader, finding my worth in the results of leadership. But if I ever look for my identity or my worth in something else other than Jesus, it's always something less than Jesus. My life is so much more fulfilling when in my restlessness as a leader, I'm continually resting that I'm ultimately approved by God, that I'm resting in him. There was an article that came out several years ago after a recent Olympics called The Dark Side of Going for Gold. And the author looked at famous Olympians and the struggle that they have, whether they won or lost in the Olympics when they come back home. Because when they come back home, they find that their identity as an Olympic athlete is over. And during the Olympics, they had such an amazing identity. And then they come home, and whether they were a gold medalist or whether they didn't medal at all, they wrestle and they struggle because they, in their minds, have less of an identity. So all of these sports psychologists who care for these athletes and these therapists and counselors who care for these athletes, they meet with them and try to help them figure out how they're going to have a fulfilling life on the other side of going for the gold, how the other side doesn't need to be the dark side. And what the therapists and sports psychologists tell them is, you have to find another identity. You have to find something else other than this that's going to make you feel alive when you get back home. Which there's some truth to that, but still a lot of pressure. You have to find another identity. Do you understand that the message of Jesus is much more liberating? Because he does not put on you the burden to find another identity. He does not say that you have to achieve a new identity. You simply receive the identity that he gives you as his son, as his daughter. This is why those of us who are Christians, we should be the absolute best at resolve, because yes, we're leaders who have some restlessness, but we rest knowing that we are secure in what Christ has accomplished for us, that we don't have to earn an identity, that we have received who he has declared us to be. Nehemiah 13, so inspiring for me as a leader, because I can see restlessness mixed with resting. And I remind myself that I'm already secure, that no matter what happens in my day, it's not going to change the reality that I am his forever son. Nehemiah 13 inspires me as a leader, but it also reminds me of the glory of Christmas as a Christian. And so let me tell you how Nehemiah 13 has everything to do with Christmas. They couldn't keep their commitments, not one of them. And the book of Nehemiah ends. And if you have a chronological Bible, the Old Testament ends. It ends with people once again being unable to live up to what they promised God they would do. The whole story of the Old Testament has been a people saying, God, we'll keep our promises, and every single person failing at keeping their promises, which we have failed to. We haven't lived up to our own ideals, and we haven't lived up to the character and the commands of God. All of us have broken our promises. The Old Testament ends, there's 400 years of silence, and then Christmas. One enters this world who keeps every one of his promises, who lives perfectly on our behalf. Jesus, God the Son, enters this world to do for us what we could not do for ourselves. We couldn't keep our promises, but our promise-keeping God enters this world to give us a new heart, to take our hearts of stone and turn them into hearts of flesh. Jesus enters this world through the Jewish people. He then is crucified in the same city that Nehemiah rebuilt, the city of Jerusalem, to give us a brand new heart, to change us and make us his forever. We could not keep our promises, but he came here. He lived perfectly on our behalf. And then he gave us all of his perfect righteousness and took away all of our sin. Jesus arrived to keep his promises because we've been unable to keep ours. The book of Nehemiah ends and it looks hopeless. It is hopeless if it depends on us, but our salvation and our identity does not depend on us. It is all based on our gracious God who entered this world for us. He came here to do for us what we constantly fail to do. We cannot keep our commitments, but he came here. We trust him. We believe in him. He changes us. He changes our hearts. Nehemiah ends hopeless, which then makes Christmas so beautiful. And over the next several weeks, it's going to be a joy and an honor to celebrate Christmas with you. Hey, I'm so glad that you joined us for our service today. And I hope and pray that God used this message to encourage you right where you are. I'd love if you hit the subscribe button, because then you could get the next alert for whenever we have services and when we ever offer content here on YouTube. So subscribe and join us for Mariners Online.